بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. It's a pleasure to be in the same room as Dr. Jonathan Brown, someone who I have immense respect for. And there are a lot of our students here from our institute, and they should know that and they do know, most of what we teach in terms of hadith has been heavily influenced by Dr. Brown. So his books are amazing. He's been a particular influence in my life in terms of understanding hadith. And in this lecture, I'll be plugging in some of his work, inshallah. Last week, Donald J. Trump, we need to get used to that name. It's hard to say the name, but we're going to have to get used to it. He appointed, I think, as the National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, General Michael Flynn. And with that appointment, it brought together a disturbing trend of appointing different people to his cabinet positions like a horrible ragtag army of the worst people you can think of. So this particular general, he's a known Islamophobe. One of the things he believes in and talks about, he's always talking about radical Islam. So for him, this idea of extremism and radicalism is linked to Islam. And that's the topic today. We, as a Muslim audience, we know, and just by way of reminder, that this idea that extremism, radicalism, or these extreme tendencies somehow are due to the Shariah or come from Islam is baseless. And we know that no concept could be more alien to our faith than the idea of extremism. Every Muslim knows one of the verses in the Quran talks about the light of Allah, which is the light that illuminates the faith. It's a beautiful parable where Allah talks about the light coming from oil that comes from a tree, شَجَرَةٍ مُبَارَكَةٍ لَا شَرْقِيَّةٍ وَلَا غَرْبِيَّةٍ. It comes from a blessed tree that's neither from the east, neither from the west. Everything in our faith teaches us to be right in the middle. And the famous verse, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We have made you a balanced ummah, an ummah in the middle, an ummah in order to bear witness unto mankind. So this concept of wasatiyah is a Quranic concept. Every great scholar talked about it. If you look at Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, one of the central features of his thought is this idea of wasatiyah. It informs everything that he talks about. If you look at even contemporary authors, many of them talk about wasatiyah. Muhammad Hashim Kamali, a great scholar, has a great book on the Quranic notion of wasatiyah, where he draws an entire theory, a systematic theory based upon this idea, this Quranic idea of being in the middle of things. So what we believe in, rather than this idea that extremism somehow is due to Islam, if there is extremism in the world, and there is, and if there is extremism within the Muslim community, and it is, it's not because of Sharia, it's because of a departure from Sharia. Because the Quran and the Sharia could not be clearer. So if there's any solution to the problem of extremism, it's going to come from within the Sharia. It's going to come from Islam itself. So by engaging the Sharia, by learning what the Deen teaches us, that's what's going to prevent us from extremism. What is it specifically within the Sharia that is such a remedy, such a powerful force for moderation? The greatest thing, the greatest aspect of the Sharia in my view is the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The voice of the Prophet is a voice of reason on every issue. The lifestyle, the example of the Prophet is an example of balance. His teachings are teachings of moderation. So on every issue, he is the anchor, he is the balance, he is the voice of moderation. And that's a great blessing. Sometimes we don't realize that Allah did not give us the Quran to me and you. Some of us, we think the Quran came to us and it's up to us to read it and interpret it. But Allah sent a text, but He sent a human being along with that text. So Allah sent a text, it's a book of ideas, but He, out of His mercy, sent it through the hands of a human being whose job was much more than being a mailman, whose job was much more than a messenger. His job was to teach us what the Quran meant, to give us that voice of reason and moderation in every issue. That's why in khutbahs we say, and sometimes we say it every Jum'ah, but we don't think about it, we say, Khairul kalam, kalamullah, wa khairul hadi, hadi Muhammad. Think about those words. The best speech, the best words are the words of Allah. But the best guidance is the guidance of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What does that mean? It means the Quran is a book of ideas. But you can take texts and ideas in any direction you want. You can go to aberrations and extremes if you don't have an anchor. But the Quran is a book of ideas. The best words that you can think of is the Kalamullah. But the best implementation and understanding of that is the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it should come as no surprise that the Sunnah, the Prophet had a lot to say on this idea of going to extremes. So the Quran speaks about it, and the Prophet through his life and through his words, everything that he taught had to do with this idea of being in the middle. He's the one who said, Halak al-mutanatti'un, halak al-mutanatti'un, halak al-mutanatti'un. Doomed are those who go to extremes. And he repeated that many times. Doomed are those who go to extremes on issues. So there's a great book that talks about this balanced nature of the Sunnah by the great Allama Yusuf al-Qaradawi, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala, who's a great voice of moderation in our times. I know many people disagree with him, but he has some amazing things to say. So he has a great book on the Sunnah, and he talks about the Sunnah as being a balanced methodology. And in that book he begins with a hadith, and that'll be the basis of my lecture, a great prophetic teaching that talks about three major pitfalls when it comes to extremism. Three major tendencies that will emerge that pull people into extreme directions. And although this hadith from an isnad standpoint not so strong, so if you read Jonathan Brown's book, Hadith is a great textbook. I recommend it in my hadith classes. If you just read that book, you might not take this hadith. But if you read his latest book, Misquoting Muhammad, which is much broader, it talks about how to implement hadith and so much more. It's a great book. I recommend everyone to read it. Then you might say, okay, you know what, this hadith can fly. And this hadith, so Imam Ahmad was one of the early scholars who considered it sound, but most of the other scholars said it's disconnected, it's not that strong. But Ibn al-Qayyim, for instance, he accepted it and he used it in some of his works. It has a great meaning. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, يَحْمِلُ هَذَا الْعِلْمِ مِنْ كُلِّ خَلَفٍ عُدُولُهُ. So he said, this knowledge will be carried in every generation. By who? عُدُولُهُ. Those who are upright and just. Those who are upright and just. So every generation will have people that carry this knowledge, the knowledge of the Shariah forward. And then he described what they would do. يَنْفُونَ عَنْهُ. They will purify or eliminate from that knowledge three things. تأويل الجاهلين وانتحال المبطلين وتحريف الغالين. A beautiful way of looking at it. He said that these people of justice, they will purify the knowledge from, number one, تأويل الجاهلين, the interpretations of the ignorant, or the misinterpretations of those who don't know. So isn't this the predicament we live in today? In the modern world, there's a general decline in literacy. We don't understand Quran, we don't understand Sunnah, we don't speak Arabic, most of us. Our Islamic learning and literacy is an all-time low. This is an information age, but it's not a knowledge age. And here, Jahilin does not mean, as the Shaykh points out in his book, does not just mean lack of awareness, but it means misplacing priorities, knowing when to apply what. So not knowing these things, it's about insight and wisdom. It's much more than that. So one of the things, these three pitfalls that the Prophet talked about, there were people that fell into that in his lifetime, in each of these directions, and he corrected that. So in terms of ta'wil al-jahilin, you have the famous example of Jabir ibn Abdullah in a hadith where he narrates they were on a journey. And during the journey, they were traveling. One of their companions was wounded, and they fell asleep during the night, and he wound up in a situation where he had to make ghusl, the ritual bath, and he was wounded. So he asked his companions, I'm sick, I'm wounded, the water is cold, can I make tayammum, which is the substitute for ghusl, for wudu or ghusl. And his companion said, no, we have water, you can't. When water is available, you cannot make tayammum. So he made tayammum, and eventually, because of that, he passed away, he died. And when the Prophet ﷺ, he was informed of that, he was very, very upset. And he said some golden words. He said, قَتَلُوهُ قَتَلَهُمُ اللَّهُ. It was a very strong indictment. He said, they killed him, may Allah kill them. He said, أَلَا سَأَلُوا إِذْ لَمْ يَعْلَمُوا. Why didn't they just ask if they did not know? And he said, فَإِنَّمَا شِفَاءُ الْعِيِّ السُّؤَالِ. Verily, the remedy of ignorance is just simply to ask. So this is a great pitfall that many people fall in, that we don't understand Islam very well, or the teachings of Islam. And sometimes we understand them, but we misinterpret them. We don't know when to apply them. And that's where you need deep knowledge, and you need to engage the sources with trusted scholars. So this is a great problem in our community. If you talk about extremism in the community, and I'll say this, and even if some people might disagree, but I believe one of the great sources of extremism and radicalization in the Muslim community, based on my own experience, is law enforcement. That's the elephant in the room no one talks about. In many cases, or you can even say perhaps the majority of cases, there are cases I've witnessed firsthand in communities. What happens is you have informants working for the FBI, or you have different agencies operating in the Muslim community. They're looking for people to prey on. Who do they find? They find the people who don't have knowledge. They find people who are on the fringes of the community, people sometimes with mental issues. And then they prey on them, and then they eventually arrest them, and they pronounce victory, and there's great cases. There's a case in Newburgh. There's an HBO documentary called The Newburgh Sting. I highly recommend everyone to watch it. Part of my family lives in Newburgh, and we witnessed firsthand there was a person working for the FBI. No one knew that at the time, but he came into the community, started talking, telling people, let's go to this place to train and stuff like that. And people knew something was up. So the people closed the masjid to him. The imam stood on the mimbar, and he gave a talk, Imam Salahuddin, and he said, look, this guy is either working for the FBI or he's working for something else, stay away from him. They shunned him from the community. And then what happened, eventually he had to go to the street, so he found some people who weren't affiliated with the masjid. One of them never stepped foot in the masjid, and whether he was a Muslim or not is questionable. One of the other people he found was someone who occasionally came to the masjid. So some of the people had seen him, but he was not a regular. So he started giving them money. They were also involved in drugs, and eventually this became that Newburgh case where they were plotting to bring down something. So this whole idea came from the government, from the FBI informants, and then eventually what happens, the media has a field day, and they were linked to the masjid anyway. Although one of them never stepped foot inside, and the masjid knew beforehand what was going on. So this story is repeated too much. So we need knowledge. We need knowledge and insight and wisdom to remedy that. As the Prophet said, فَإِنَّمَا الشِّفَاءُ الْعِيِّ السُّؤَالِ. The remedy for ignorance is simply to ask. The second pitfall the Prophet talked about, وَانْتِحَالَ الْمُبْطِلِينَ. The false claims of the falsifiers. Intihal in Arabic means false claims. So now this pitfall, the first one was kind of like an internal pitfall. People who are Muslim, sometimes with good intentions, wind up misinterpreting. Intihal al-mubtalin points to an external influence coming into the religion. So bringing false ideas into the faith. And that's a huge problem in our time. There was not such a problem, such a great problem in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the idea of innovations or people bringing new ideas, because the Prophet was still alive. Although there were some, tendencies. So for instance, you had false prophets. You had Musaylima al-Kadhab. So he was a false prophet. He claimed to be part of the Muslim community, but he brought his own ideas. He claimed to have his own revelation. So he's trying to bring new things into the religion, and it was squashed. We know how the Prophet dealt with that. But after his time, the problem became more acute. So in the first few generations, you had this fabrication tradition in hadith, for instance. You can read about it in Dr. Brown's books. So you had this tradition of, as Muslims expanded into various societies, you had people in these various societies that were bringing their ideas, and then some with agendas, they were sitting down just inventing hadith after hadith. Some of them claimed to invent hundreds of thousands of hadith, and they just made up various hadith for different ideas, for different agendas. and they imported that into the religion. And this hadith, يَحْمِلُ هَذَا الْعِلْمِ, the Prophet said every generation will have al-udul, those people who will be upright. So Allah blessed the scholars of hadith. Great enterprise. They were blessed with the skills and the resources and the ability to purify Islam from these elements. So now today, because of their efforts, we have books of hadith that are authentic, and we know the hadith that are not authentic. We have books of fabricated hadith. They're on the sides of the shelves. We know what they are. So this is a great problem, especially in our times when people bring all sorts of ideas into Islam. Everyone brings their idea and tries to find an Islamic justification for it. So this is a pitfall we need to be aware of. وَانْتِحَالَ الْمُبْطِلِينَ. And then the final pitfall is تَحْرِيف الْغَالِينَ, the distortions of those who go to extremes, the distortions of the extremists. And this is perhaps the greatest problem in our time. So the distortion of the religion coming from those who go to excesses. So what are these people? These are the people who bypass the ease and the moderation of the deen. This deen is all about ease and moderation, but some people, they want more than that. They surpass the limits, so they go to excesses. So this is the distortion of the extremists. This problem was huge in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there are so many examples of him correcting people going into these excesses. So for instance, one time he was giving a khutbah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he saw a man standing away from the audience in the sun. Everyone's sitting, listening to the khutbah. This man is standing in the sun. So afterwards he asked, who this person was, and they said, this is Abu Israel. He made a vow, a promise to Allah that he's not going to speak, that he's going to fast every day of his life, he's never going to sit down for the sake of Allah, and he's never going to stand in the shade, he's always going to stand in the sun. This is his own idea of, coming closer to Allah. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said to his companions, "Murhu falyatakallam walyaq'ad walyastadhil walyutimma sawmahu." He said, command him to sit down, command him to get in the shade, command him to stop fasting like that, and command him to start talking to people. So the Prophet, he immediately corrected many, many individuals in his lifetime from going to these excesses. One time, 3 people came to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and they wanted to ask the wives about the worship of the Prophet. Now the wives are Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, they are the teachers, so people would come to them frequently asking about those things that they didn't see from the Prophet, like how he behaved at home, how he worshipped at night. So the wives of the Prophet, they described the worship to them, and for some reason they felt that, this is the Prophet, who are we compared to the Prophet? That's the mental reasoning they went through. So one of them said, what, as for me, I'm going to fast every single day of my life, because I'm not like the Prophet, I need more. I'm much worse than the Prophet, I need much more. And the second one, he said, as for me, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to get married. And the third person, he said, as for me, I'm going to pray every single night, the entire night. I'm not going to sleep. So eventually the Prophet ﷺ, the wives told him what happened. He called them forward and he taught them. He said, "Inni la akhshakum lillah wa atqakum lah." He said, look, you should know that I am the most fearful of Allah amongst all of you, and the most pious amongst you, the most taqwa and the most khashiyah. And he said to them, look, I pray at night and I sleep at night. I marry women and I fast some days and some days I do not fast. And then he taught them, he reminded them, look, in another narrative, "An-nikahu min sunnati." Nikah is from my sunnah, my way. And he said, "Faman raghiba an sunnati falaysa minni." Whoever turns away from my way, and he's talking about his way of moderation. Whoever turns away from my methodology, my way, my style, he's not from me. So there are many, many examples in his lifetime. Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, for instance, he's a great companion who the Prophet taught extra. He spent a lot of time with him. He's the one of the companions the Prophet gave permission to write hadith in his lifetime. And he admits that he wrote more than 1,000 hadith in the lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a proof that hadith was written down very early on. And Abdullah ibn Amr, he was one of the young companions with a lot of energy. So he had energy and he wanted to do so much. But the Prophet kept teaching him It's not about how much you do, but it's about what you do consistently. So he taught him about Qiyamul Layl. He said, Ya Abdullah, لا تكن مثل فلان كان يقوم الليل وترك قيام الليل. Oh Abdullah, do not be like such and such a person who used to make Qiyamul Layl, then he stopped making Qiyamul Layl. Whatever practice you adopt, you need to be consistent. One time, Abdullah ibn Amr, he wanted to finish the Quran all the time. So the Prophet said, okay, finish the Quran fi kulli shahrin. In every month you finish the Quran one time. That means recite the entire Quran beginning to end. Abdullah, he said, Inni aqwa min dhalik. I have more energy than that. 1 month, that's nothing. Give me permission to do it sooner. So he said, okay, do it in 20 days. Abdullah said, Inni aqwa min dhalik. I have more energy than that. Give me permission to do more. So he said, okay, do it in 7 days, 1 week. Abdullah says, Inni aqwa min dhalik. Then he gave him permission to do it in 3 days. And when he said 3 days, Abdullah still said, Inni aqwa min dhalik. I can do it faster than that. But the Prophet said, no. He said, لا يفقه من قرأه في أقل من ثلاث. The one who recites the Quran or finishes in less than 3 days does not understand it. That's not the purpose. So stop here. So Abdullah, that's the habit he maintained. Abdullah is the one who asked about fasting all the time. So the Prophet said, okay, fast Ramadan. He said he can do more. Okay, 3 days every month. He said he could do more. Mondays and Thursdays. He said he could do more. And then he said, okay, fast 1 day and don't fast 1 day, every other day. This is the fast of Dawood. And Abdullah said he could do more. The Prophet said, no, that's the maximum you could do. And Abdullah, Imam Nawawi relates that later on in his life, as he got older, as his zeal declined, as the natural progress as humans get older, he said he was so regretful. And he said, woe unto me, had I taken the rukhsah of the Prophet ﷺ, it would have been better for me. Because they maintained that practice and became very difficult later on. But at every moment of his life, the Prophet ﷺ, he taught about ease. And the Quran says, يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. Allah says, Allah desires ease for you. He doesn't desire hardship for you. And where is this verse? By the way, it's very interesting. This verse appears in the verses of fasting. Kutiba alaykum al-siyam. That's where this verse appears. So think about, of all the things you do, maybe the most difficult is fasting. You know, praying takes 5 minutes, 7 minutes. You know, zakat, if you have money, that's not that hard. Only if you have money, you pay it. Hajj is fairly difficult, but that's only once in a lifetime. But fasting, especially in some places where the day is so long, it's a difficult act of worship. But in there, Allah reminds us, يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ. It's not, the purpose of Islam is not hardship, it's ease. So the Prophet said, إِنَّ الدِّينَ يُسْرٌ فَوَلَنْ يَشَادَ الدِّينَ أَحَدٌ إِلَّا غَلَبَهُ. This deen is easy, and no one makes their life difficult except that it will eventually overcome them. So this is the message from the Prophet ﷺ, that this deen is about ease. We are an ummah of moderation. And these are 3 pitfalls. The misinterpretations of the ignorant, those who don't have insight and knowledge and wisdom. And secondly, those who bring foreign ideas into the deen. And the third, tahrif al-ghalin, those who distort the religion, becoming excessively harsh and excessively strict. All 3 pitfalls take a person outside of the middle wasatiyah and take them into extremes. So we need to be wary. Ask Allah to bless all of us and make us an ummah of the middle way. أقول قولي هذا وصلى الله وخير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وسلم.